And this week we are traveling with Odysseus as he journeys to the undiscovered country, that is, the realm of the dead. A journey in which almost no one comes back from, except our hero does come back. Hi, I'm Gray Miles and welcome to the Odyssey. Come on the journey with me. So in this section of the Odyssey, we find Odysseus slitting the throats of two animals and letting the black blood spill into a hole in the ground, right? Where the mouth of an underground river bubbles out. And in that moment, the hungry ghosts, the ghouls, emerge from Hades, clamoring and climbing over each other like a nest of zombies to get at him, right? And Odysseus in this moment is gripped with what he calls pale fear, right? But as he starts to identify the lost dead that are emerging and starts to see them and they taste the blood, he starts to communicate with them. And it becomes about communicating with his past. So in this sequence, the story changes from a kind of a horror movie scenario where the dead or the undead are kind of clawing at each other to emerge from the grave, and our characters gripped with terror, right? To after they drink the blood of the living animals, right? And it's running down their faces, right? In that moment, suddenly they become aware again. They become cognizant of their past and their connection to Odysseus himself. And now Odysseus begins a journey into the past, but he is seeking the prophet, right, who will tell him of his future. So he is, in a sense, contemplating his past in order to learn about what his future will hold. Like all of us must do at some point in our mythic journey. We must look at our past, right? Grapple with our past to make sense of where we're going. The question that we all have to ask ourselves one time or another is what happens when we die? Now, the ancient Greeks believed in the existence of a soul, despite the fact that this was a pre-Christian culture. They thought that the soul was the site of our personhood, of our individuality, and also our moral choices. In that sense, our connection to a community. The Greeks believed that if you weren't buried properly, you were doomed to become disconnected from your soul and wander Hades as a hungry ghost. In a sense, unconsolidated, not part of the community of the dead. There is a profound sorrow in this. And so the Greeks invented elaborate funereal rites of passage into the realm of the dead, right? So for ancient Greeks, just as much as becoming a man or a woman was an important rite of passage, so was dying a community act. So when Odysseus journeys to the realm of the dead, he sees his old bras. His old friends are down there, right? His old companions at arms, but also a lot of their mothers, right? And so there's this sense of a community that's more than just a community of warriors. Odysseus enters into a dialogue with dead people from his past. This is a kind of occult ritual, right, that many cultures have taken part in. It is communicating with the dead through sacred rites and necromancy, black magic, in other words, is what we're talking about here. Odysseus begins by talking to his friend and companion Elpenor, who just died the day before by falling off the roof of his lover's house, drunk as a pig, right? And broke his neck. And Odysseus is like, how did you get here so quickly, bruh? Why are you here already when I was sailing my swiftest ships? So we begin to understand the kind of mystery of the transmutation of souls, because Elpenor arrived there through another interdimensional portal, right? That's what happened. And then Odysseus recognizes his mother, whom he didn't even realize was dead, right? 3 times he tries to embrace her. 3 times his arms pass through her, right? Telling us that even then the ancient Greeks had the concept of the dead as incorporeal, that is, outside of their bodies or disembodied. Now, Odysseus is seeking wisdom by talking to these dead friends and family members of his, right? But he's seeking wisdom indirectly, as he often moves, right? Obliquely, coming in from the side. And he learns that his mother died of grief for while he was away fighting the Trojan War and in the aftermath. So in a sense, now we are experiencing almost an anti-war protest song in the form of a ballad to a warrior, right? Because what we're learning about is the damage that war inflicts on people who love the warriors, right? The post-traumatic stress, okay, that echoes down the generations, causing damage and toxicity to leach into these relationships at each stage along the way, and having people die and become broken from the grief that war causes. And we're beginning to open up a chapter in which the author is suggesting that war might be a pointless tragedy, right? Far from being a proving ground for a warrior's strength, it might be a trap for his pride. At this point in the story, now we meet one of the strangest and most intriguing characters in all of fiction. Tiresias, the blind prophet, right? One of the only truly transgendered characters ever to have been written about in the canon of Western literature, okay? This is a person who had a strange affiliation with the gods, but was also mortal, someone who was on the threshold, liminal, as we say, meaning limen in Latin for threshold. He was transformed from a man into a woman, and then he got embroiled into an argument between Zeus and Zeus's wife Hera over who has more sexual pleasure, men or women. And in the end, he had to say, women by 10 times as much, right? And he was punished for this and banished into Hades at one point. Now Odysseus finds him, seeking him out for his wisdom, because who could be wiser than someone who has lived mortal as both man and woman, right? And he seeks out Tiresias' prophecy, which is ultimately, how will I be able to return home and stay there? Right? He's yearning for home so much, but inside he knows he's a restless soul, someone who's always going to be called over the next frontier, across the next ocean, right? Along the next adventure. So what is the secret to staying home and staying faithful to your home if you are at your very soul a rover, a wanderer, right? A man of many turns? Well, it's Tiresias that has the answer. And it might be a little bit unsatisfying, but he tells him, right, to carry the oar to a land where no one can recognize what it is anymore, and they think that it's only a tool used for plowing the fields, a winnowing fan, in actual fact, right? But the problem here is, of course, there is no place where they won't recognize what an oar is. Every place understands what an ocean is and what an oar is, right? So in some sense, Tiresias is saying you have to just come to terms with the side of yourself that will always be seeking something outside of your own home, even after you return. So after Odysseus learns of the prophecy of how he will be able to return home, how he has to avoid eating the cattle of the sun god Helios, right, which, as we're going to learn, that has this kind of domino effect. Now he's ready to go. He's encountered the horror of the land of the dead. He's seen what there is to see. He's found his prophet and heard the prophecy, but he stays because Odysseus is curious. Fundamentally, he wants to learn He's attracted to learning beyond all reason, right? He thirsts for knowledge. And this is a theme in ancient Greek culture that comes up again and again. What is the most delicious ambrosia to an ancient Greek? Is it the taste of wine? They love the wine, but no. Is it a warm bed with a willing, loving partner? They love sex too, and the pleasure that that brings. But again, the answer is no. What they thirst most for is knowledge, right? And this is an opportunity for Odysseus to find knowledge that no one has ever experienced before. Now he gets to interview, like a journalist, the dead on what happened. And what's interesting here is that you'll notice that Odysseus starts with the moms, right? The mothers of the slain warriors and the slain sons. And this can be nothing else but a critical commentary on warrior culture itself. Why do so many mothers cry? What are they weeping for? Their lost sons, their lost husbands, their lost fathers, right? Tiro was raped by a god and forced to keep silent her entire life. Does that remind you of anything in modern times? And only after she's dead is she permitted to speak, right, of the violence done to her. So in a warrior culture, as many opportunities as there are for glory, right, there are pathways to despair, to destruction. And the author is telling us, look at your own social order. Look, examine at your own world. And what's the best place to do that? Interview your dead, right? Think about, how did people lose their lives during this pandemic, during any kind of great event? That will reveal the flaw lines within your own culture. No journey to the underworld for any warrior, and Odysseus is quite a warrior, would be complete without him discovering his fallen comrades. The Trojan War looms over this entire story like a vast shadow, right, of a history of male bonding and incredible foolhardiness, and yes, great heroism as well, right? It looms over the story. It informs everything that happens. And Odysseus has a deeply complex relationship with this war in his past. On the one hand, it is without a doubt something that he experienced that will set him apart forever. It has shaped who he is as a human being. And I don't think he would trade it for anything. On the other hand, its tragic effects cannot be ignored. The futility of war, the way it's just needlessly destructive, right? How do these two conflicting ideas coexist in his mind at the same time? He's a warrior. He has to somehow make sense of it. And in so doing, he meets his fallen comrades, right? They come to him out of the depths of Hades, and they drink the blood of the cut throat of the calf, right? And they speak to him. Achilles, he debates, should I have led a long life of obscurity, stayed at home, been a good father, a good husband? Or should I have had a short and glorious and adventurous life as one of the greatest warriors in all of history? He still doesn't know. The fact of the matter is, Achilles is wandering beneath the ground in the realm of Hades, unsure of whether he made the right decision. He isn't even granted certitude in death. And Agamemnon, right? The first among equals, the leader of the kings that sailed to the great walls of Ilium, of Troy, right? He confronts Odysseus with this terrible story about how when he returned, his wife had taken up with another, right? And together they murdered him, slaughtered him like an ox at his own table, and spilled his blood. And it was only his son who was able to revenge him after his death. But again, what we're seeing here is the costs of a terrible war, right? Why did Clytemnestra betray him? and conspire with her lover to murder her own husband because she was abandoned, right? Set adrift. And Odysseus, his heart goes out. He feels the shame, right, of this action. But on another level, he understands it. And he wonders, what will happen to me when I return home to Penelope, to the love of my life? What will be waiting for me in the shadows?